The John Lebang Show has been known to make people laugh, sing, think, scream, throw things in rage, and generally lose their minds. Listener discretion is advised.
Scheduled programming to bring you a show on the edge. Broadcasting worldwide and out to the greater universe, you're listening to the John Lebang Show.
Greetings, Earthlings, and alert the media. The John Lebang Show is back on the air. And this hour, we're bringing you a special guest, my good friend, Derek Shelmerdine, joining us from across the pond. Derek, welcome back to the show.
Hi, John. It's great to be back chatting with you. I mean, we've got some great birthdays coming up in October, so I thought it might be nice to wish a few happy birthdays to people who are celebrating in the wonderful month of October.
It sounds great to me. We're going to start off with Mike Rutherford.
That's right. Happy birthday, Mike Rutherford. He's the bass playing founder of, or one of the founders of Genesis. He was born on the 2nd of October, 1950 in Guildford in Surrey. Now, Guildford's quite a posh place, and Genesis actually all came together in one of England's, what we call public schools, which actually means they're private schools and very expensive to send your kids to. And I mean, they sort of came together in the late 60s, and they were one of the Peter Gabriel was the lead singer, and he interesting stage presence. He used to dress as a flower and all kinds of things. But I mean, the Genesis's first, it was interesting. They were signed up to the Decca label by Jonathan King, and they released their first album, and 4 to 5 singles. All of them sank without trace, and you know they really didn't look as if they were going anywhere. But then they sort of kicked themselves into life and became one of the premier prog bands. I mean, their first single was "Silent Sun," which is really quite collectible because nobody bought it. But Mike Rutherford's interesting because he decided to have a sort of side band, and he formed in '85. He formed Mike and the Mechanics while he was still running along with Genesis, and they had their first hit single with "Silent Running" in 1986. It was successful both sides of the pond, 21 in the UK and number 6 in the US. So he managed to have a nice dual career. And interestingly enough, he's known to play a double neck guitar with a 12-string as one part and a bass guitar as the other. Now, that's an interesting combination.
Right, because most double neck guitars are the 6-string and the 12-string. That gave him an added low-end advantage for making music.
Oh, absolutely. And he's on tour as well. So, I mean, you can find him in Dublin in the UK between the 18th of February and the 9th of April. So sort of plenty of time to plan to go and see Mike and the Mechanics.
Speaking of bass players, we also have Sting is coming up this month.
Yeah, happy birthday, Sting. He was also born on the 2nd. So if you were born on the 2nd, you're in very good company. That was 1951 for spring. He was actually born Gordon Sumner. That's how his mother used to refer to him, in Wallsend in the north of England. And what's interesting about him is he picked up his nickname when he was in a band called the Phoenix Jazzmen in the mid-1970s, because he used to wear a bee-like black and yellow striped sweater. That must have been a sight to behold.
These musicians, they always have the flashiest attire.
Exactly. Sartorial elegance, as they say. And he went on, he was in a number of bands, and the last one he left before joining the Police was a band called Last Exit. So sort of early part of 1977, the Police came together, and on their first single, it was Stuart Copeland's Sting and a guitarist called Henry Padovani. And it was a sort a side band. Stuart Copeland and Sting were in another band around the same sort of time, middle of 77, called Strontium 90. There's a bit of physics to conjure with. And it was in that band that the guitarist was Andy Summers. And they all, got on well. So Summers joined the Police. So for a time, they were a four-piece with Copeland, Sting, Padovani, and Summers. But obviously, Padovani took the hump, and he left in the August of 77, and that's when they became a three-piece. And the Police that we all came to know and love.
You were talking about Strontium 90. That was a side project, right?
That's right. And the first single that was released as a Police single, it was a Police single called Fallout in the February of 77. That actually has Padovani as the guitarist on it. So if you're a Police fan, it's well worth hunting out that first single because it's the one with a different guitarist.
And he's on tour, isn't he?
That's right. Oh, he's all over the place. Across, 21st of September to the 19th of November. You can see him in America, Canada, then he's back to America. Then he goes over to Russia, Ukraine, Czech Republic, and Poland. So that's quite an interesting set of venues.
Right, and Sting is touring as the solo artist. Sting, the band Police, they haven't reunited for this tour.
Not for this. And it is interesting because Stuart Copeland, I'm not sure if he's out and about at the moment, he might well be, but he's on the road doing his own thing, and Andy Summers is on the road doing his own thing. I'm not sure if they've got gigs lined up at the moment, but in very recent times they certainly did have them. I mean, it might be just worth mentioning that, we say where the countries that these guys are in, but on my website, if you go to this page, it'll send you to the link for the band itself that gives all the tour details. So if you want to check out if Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers have got any gigs at the moment, just check it out through the website www.rockandrollunraveled.com.
That's awesome. Now, with the Police, they're officially not a band anymore, right? They're just all doing their solo thing. And there's no talk about. I haven't heard any that there was talk about them ever getting back together. Why did they break up?
I think they just ran their course, really. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't reunite at some point in the future. I don't recall seeing any big official announcement saying that, we're never ever going to play together again. And I don't recall any of them falling out in, Everly Brothers style fashion. So it wouldn't surprise me if they put a world tour together in the distant or not so distant future, because there'd be an awful lot of money in it for them.
Yeah, I was curious about that because that was one of the bands that I never heard a lot of drama from. They seem to be a really tight-knit band, and they just stopped performing together.
Yeah, I think what it probably is that, they were together for a long time, and they're all very active, and they're all very smart musicians, in their own rights. Sting, you think of Police, you think of Sting, but the other guys are very accomplished musicians, and I think they were just keen to develop off in their own direction. And Sting as well does quite a lot of solo stuff that doesn't sound very Police-like, as it were.
Yeah, he's a very versatile writer.
Yeah.
So we go from Sting to one of the funnest bands of all time, the Ramones.
Oh, yeah. They've got no tour coming up, but I couldn't let October birthdays go without saying, if you were born on the 8th of October and you're a Ramones fan, wow, you're in good company. Johnny Ramone was born in 48 on the 8th, and CJ Ramone was born on October the 8th in 1965, a generation apart, basically. Johnny was obviously a founding member back in 74, and CJ replaced Dee Dee Ramone when that all went pear-shaped at the sort of end of the 80s.
It's too bad they're not going to be touring.
Oh, yeah.
No chance there.
Oh, they'd be a great band to see. They were very instrumental in the whole British punk thing taking off in 77. They all claim that the Ramones were one of the really big influences on them.
And they were always, at least here in the States, they were always that band that a lot of people talked, not in the level of Zeppelin and all that, but it was like that lower half of groups. The people out here just loved them. I mean, even Blitzkrieg Bob was put on the new Spider-Man movie just a year and a half ago because that's how popular they were just here. It was a nice underground niche for the people, and punk was that in general.
Oh, absolutely. And it was great. I mean, that was the time, prog had taken rock up into the stratosphere of full orchestral accompaniment in live gigs. And it was people like the New York Dolls and the Ramones that very much pulled it back down to 2-minute songs at like 200 miles an hour. With not too many complex chord changes. And it was, good old-fashioned rock and roll, as it were.
Yeah, they simplified music again, and it was popular.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And they're great to listen to now as well. I love that those early Ramones albums. I think they're brilliant. Shame there's no tour.
Yeah. And is there, I thought somebody died, right? One of the members have passed away, and the rest of the guys probably just don't want to go on tour without them, right? Something like that.
I don't think that we'll be seeing the Ramones on tour as the Ramones anytime soon. But I thought, you couldn't let October Birthdays go by without the fact that the two of them were born on the same day. I mean, what's the chances of that?
Yeah, exactly. Now, the day after, October 9th, of course, a few years earlier, Jackson Browne was born.
Oh, that's right. One of the great singer-songwriters. Happy birthday, Jackson Browne, October the 9th, 1948. He was actually born in Germany, in Heidelberg. His father was an American serviceman, so he was serving out there when Jackson Browne was born.
That's interesting. So technically, he's a native German.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works in terms of passports, whether he can get himself a German passport anytime soon. But certainly that's where life started. And in terms of his sort of professional life, in the mid-'60s, he started out in a nitty-gritty dirt band, which is interesting. He wasn't there for very long, but what a great band to start out in.
I have to admit, I don't know that band. Any songs that we would know?
Oh, they do a brilliant version of When the Circle is Unbroken. They've got a triple album. They're a country band, basically. And they've never really made the sort of first division, as it were. They never quite got into the sort of Willie Nelson levels. But they are a well-respected country band.
It was nice to hear you sing there, Derek. I'm usually the one doing the singing.
Yeah, I'm the only Welshman who can't sing, mate. My father was a good singer. My brother sings. But
you play drums, man. Sorry, but drums are harder than singing.
You don't get too many singing drummers, I must say. I mean, there are one or two famous ones, but not too many. But he signed himself up to a branch of Elektra Records. He became a house songwriter for a while. And, he's had some awesome albums, but he's also written some interesting stuff. I mean, on Nico's Chelsea Girl album in 1967, he wrote 3 of the songs and plays guitar on them. And, people like Lou Reed and all sorts of people are on that particular album. And he wrote Take It Easy with Glenn Frey for the Eagles. So as well as all of his own individual solo albums, he's written some great stuff for other people.
Yeah, he's an iconic singer and songwriter, definitely. And he's on tour.
Oh, he's on tour. I mean, he seems to have developed a social conscience because he's got 5 concerts coming up, all in America. That's sort of pretty much across America. And he calls it the Lantern Tour. And quotes after that, it says, concerts for migrant refugees and families. And that spreads across October from the 15th to the 28th.
Why not? Do your tour? Because everybody's got to have something to say, right?
Absolutely. It's good. I think it's quite good to see musicians get involved in politics as well.
Definitely. You got, now we're up to October 10th, and you got John Prine?
Yeah, another great singer-songwriter. One of the guys I don't think that's ever really got the credit that he deserves. He was born on the 10th of October, 46, and his first album came out in 71. And, I mean, if you're a John Prine fan, I mean, it had three of his all-time best tracks on: Illegal Smile, Sam Stone, and Angel from Montgomery. I mean, Sam Stone, any song that has a line, "There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes." Absolutely incredible. And it was Chris Christopherson that actually helped him get a record deal. Now, Chris Christopherson, actually, a lot of his stuff's on Monument, but he introduced John Prine to Atlantic Records. So he certainly got himself onto a very mainstream record label. And he's on tour as well. America and Canada, well, for the rest of this year, basically, September through to 31st of December. So lots of opportunities to catch John Prine.
Don't go anywhere now.
John will be right back right after this.
Yes, it will. Check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-'70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rockandrollunraveled.com. Follow him at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look him up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now.
I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
The only reason that we are still together is that the subtlety of delicate change in the music.
Some of it's old, some of it's new, something borrowed, something brown.
It's the sea of a band that wears makeup, and you've got snakes, and you've got guillotines, and you've got really hard rock, Detroit rock and roll.
All those groups and people that started off when we were starting off are all still going.
It's funny how many times rock and roll has been dead. Yeah, how many times people have said it's been dead, it just keeps coming back like a bloody phoenix. Rock and roll!
You know, that I think that's the first time we've ever talked, even mentioned Mr. Chris Christopherson in any of our conversations. That's amazing.
Absolutely. He's a very talented guy. I mean, he was lucky that he didn't die with Buddy Holly, because he was in Buddy Holly, because Buddy Holly had split from the Crickets. At the time, Buddy Holly did that fateful last tour to get some money. I mean, touring the Midwest in December, the winter, is not a good place to be. It can be chilly. I used to go to Fargo for various reasons, and I was there in the winter. And it's a cold old place. But Chris Christopherson was I think he was playing bass as Buddy Holly's backing band, and he should have been on the plane that Buddy Holly hired, because they were all getting frozen to death. Literally, the drummer on the tour bus ended up in hospital with mild frostbite. So you can see what it was like. And Chris Christopherson swapped his seat. I think he swapped with the Big Bopper.
Wow, that's a lucky call.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely incredible. So, we very nearly did not have a Chris Christopherson career ahead of that, because that was February 1959. So he's on borrowed time, as they say.
Definitely. Up next, we have the famous October 13th. The famous October 13th.
Yes, it was a good day to be born. I think 1940. Happy birthday, Chris Farlowe. Now, Chris Farlowe's one of those British singers from the 60s who was, the guy just should have been so much bigger. He's in the same sort of vein as people like Eric Burdon, but he's never got the international acclaim that people like Burdon have got. But he's interesting because, he went on. He started out in a skiffle group. He was born John Henry Dayton in Islington in London, and his first band was the John Henry Skiffle Group back in the late 1950s. That morphed into his own band, Chris Farlowe and the Thunderbirds. And interestingly enough, in '66, he was joined by Carl Palmer, who was only 16 years old at the time. So I think that was Carl Palmer's first professional gig, and he was with him for a while.
Of ELP fame.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, he's worked with some pretty serious people. His third UK hit was Ride On Baby, again in 66. And that was written by Jagger and Richard and produced by Mick Jagger. I mean, you don't think of Mick Jagger as a producer, but he does pop up all over the place doing odd productions for people. And then Chris Fowler went on to join Colosseum. I mean, serious jazz rock band. He wasn't one of the original members. He joined in time for their third album, Daughter of Time, with Dave Greenslade, who went on to form the band Greenslade, and of course John Heisman, who was the power behind Colosseum 1 and Colosseum 2. And then he went on in the early 70s. In 72, he joined Atomic Rooster, again not a founding member, but they're in time for their fourth album, Made in England. He's just had such a great career, and it's a shame that he hasn't got more. I mean, he's had hits, solo hits, lots in the UK, and he's had some in America as well, but he's not one of these names that people recognise very generally.
But it doesn't take away from his talent, Derek, and you know that. Some of these guys, you just can't. There's just not enough spots at the top there to fill everybody in. That's the problem.
Absolutely. I remember seeing Chris Farlow in the mid-'60s, and he really is an awesome singer. And he's on tour as well. I can only find a couple of dates, and they're 11th of January and 1st of March of next year. But I wouldn't mind betting that, keep an eye on his Facebook site and places like that, and my website, because if I can find more dates, I keep updating the dates. So once people go into the Who's on Tour on the website, they stay there, and each month I just update it just when people start new tours. I mean, there's over 100 people on there now. And they've all essentially emanated from this show, John, from talking about what people were up to and where they are now.
And that's rockandrollunraveled.com, just in case everybody forgot when you mentioned it earlier.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You're really great about that, Derek, though. You give me a show plan, and then you also post it on the website so everybody can follow along if they if they want to. You do amazing work, my friend, and I can't thank you enough for being even a part of the broadcast here, because you just know your stuff, and if you don't know it, you go and find it out, which is great.
Well, thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure working with you as always.
Enough of the man love, I guess. October 14th is next.
Absolutely. Back to the rock and roll. This is one of the stranger ones. This guy, Cliff Richard, a British superstar, absolute superstar, born the 14th of October 1940. He was born Harry Webb in Lucknow in India. And the guy is a phenomenal success. I mean, he was one of the original rock and roll 50s artists. He was one of these guys that, if you catch his 1950s singles, he sounds just like Elvis Presley, as every other aspiring British rock and roll artist attempted to sound like either Elvis Presley or Gene Vincent. But he's never managed to crack America. I mean, if you look at his first three American singles, it sort of tells the story, really. In 1959, he managed to get to number 30. These are all Billboard rankings, with a song called Living Doll that was, a big hit over here. But his next hit wasn't until 1964. But the timing of it was absolutely unbelievable. He did a cover of Tommy Edwards's early 50s, It's All in the Game, and he managed to get to number 25 in America with that. But that was actually 3 weeks before the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. So if you like, he was like just a whisker ahead of the British invasion of 1964. So his success there was not in any way attributable to the Beatles.
It's almost like it was premature. Like he came out too early.
Absolutely, but what's incredible was that you'd have thought, he had a hit then just before that, and then the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in the February, and by the end of 1964, there were British artists and beat groups having loads of hit singles. But it never happened for Cliff Richard. His next hit single wasn't until in America wasn't until 1976
12
with
years
Devil
later.
Woman. Yeah, absolutely. They got to number 6. I think it's probably his biggest hit to date in America.
The Devil Woman.
It's actually Cliff Richard is a very devout Christian as well. I mean, he wears, he promotes his Christianity quite a lot. So recording a song like "Devil Woman" is a bit of a surprise, really, for Cliff. But his original band, well, the band he was with up until the 80s, I think they were on and off working together. Best known as the Shadows, but they were originally called the Drifters. So back in the Living Doll days, you'll find his early singles are Cliff Richard and the Drifters. They changed their name to avoid any confusion with the very famous American vocal group of the same name. I mean, the Drifters, everybody has heard of them. But happy birthday, Hank Marvin. He was born on October the 28th, 41, and he was the lead guitarist. And he was one of the original British rock and roll guitar heroes. There's no doubt about that. He also started off in the world of skiffle in the UK. He was in a group called the Vipers. And he reputedly owned the first ever Fender guitar that came into the UK.
He did what? What with the first ever guitar?
He apparently he's widely reported as owning the first ever Fender that found its way into the UK.
Awesome.
So when Leo started mass producing them, he had one of the first to come to the UK.
Wow, that's an interesting piece of history right there.
Yeah, absolutely. He was born Brian Robson Rankin. He was also from the north of England, the same sort of part of the world as Sting, basically. Although he was born in Newcastle.
And he was like one of the earliest British guitar heroes.
He was, yeah. In terms of rock guitarists, he was one of the very first British rock and roll rock guitarists. He's well renowned, and lots of people suggest that they were influenced by him. But what happened with Cliff towards the end of the 50s? He sort of gravitated more into pop music and movies, and he really became a family entertainer more. So he was much more in the sort of pop, light entertainment TV world. But in Virgin hit singles, which is the Guinness hit singles, I think, it's disappeared now. And the Virgin one seems to be the one that lists all the acts. In their volume 2 that was released or published, I should say, in 2010, Cliff is actually at number 2 of their list of acts with the most top 40 British hits. He had 124.
And number 1 with Elvis, right?
Absolutely. The only person with more hits at that point in the UK was Elvis, with 146, but he's virtually unheard of in America.
Of course he is. Yeah, I've not heard of him, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners, you're enlightening them at this moment.
Absolutely. I doubt if many American listeners to the show will have come across him, but everybody in the UK will have heard of him. He's not one of after the late 1950s, he went very much into the pop music, as I said. So he's one of these people that's not really very cool to like. It's a sort of person your mother would like, as it were. But he's got a big following in the UK.
And Cliff Richards is on tour. I want to ask something real quick. Is there a reason why he changed his name from Harry Webb? Because I actually thought that would be a great band's name, Harry Webb.
Interesting you should say that, because that's exactly how it came about. He started off as well in the skiffle era, and I can't remember the guy's name now, but he got involved with this manager when he was coming together with the guys that formed the original version of his first backing band, the Drifters, and they were going out because the Drifters weren't that successful in the UK in the 50s, so that wasn't a surprising name to pick up. But what happened when the original lineup of the Drifters got together and met this manager? They said, well, what you really need is you need to be Somebody and the Drifters, the name of the lead singer. And they thought the opposite, actually. They actually thought, well, we don't really think Harry Webb and the Drifters is rock and roll enough. So they sat down. I forget exactly how Cliff Richard came about, but it was based on some people they knew and some combinations, and they became Cliff Richard and the Drifters. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly how it came about, because they didn't think Harry Webb was cool enough as a sort of frontman name for a band.
But looking in hindsight, I think that's a great name for a band, Harry Webb.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's on tour.
Yeah, his 60th anniversary tour. He's in the UK from the 4th to the 22nd of October, and then he pops over to Denmark for the 22nd to the 26th of October, and that's his 60th anniversary tour.
Still
absolutely
going.
incredible.
Like you
Sadly,
said,
the Shadows aren't on tour. If you look at their their Facebook page, there's a photograph and stuff that refers to being taken on their final tour in 2014. So maybe we won't be seeing the Shadows anytime soon as a band again.
That's unfortunate.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they went through various lineups. They have been, touring on and off up until very, very recently, different combinations of them.
Now sit your butt down.
The John LeBang Show will be right back.
And I promise you'll love it. Yes. I'd like to take a quick second here to tell you about our new sponsor, Quality One Painting. For interior and exterior painting needs, call Tom at Quality One, 313-982-2986. Tom will give you free estimates, senior discounts, and I can tell you from meeting the gentleman, he's one of the nicest guys on the face of the planet. So for a quality paint job with a professional attitude, call Tom at Quality One Painting. That's 313-982-2986. 313-982-2986. Quality One Painting. Hey, man, it's at the bottom of the hour, man. Do you know where your kids are, man?
If you want to contact the John LeBang Show, feel free to send an email to jlebang@live.com. And if you're on Twitter, look him up at John LeBang. And don't forget to go to his Facebook page at The John LeBang Show. Now here's John.
Now, October also has a couple of birthdays from the band The Moody Blues.
Oh, that's right. I mean, they've got a really interesting beginning. I mean, happy birthday, Justin Hayward, 14th of October, 46. He wasn't actually one of the original members. He was in the second wave, but happy birthday, Denny Lane. He was one of the original members, born on the 29th of October, 1944.
And what a lucky man he was to be in the Moody Blues.
Oh, absolutely. And he went on to bands like Air Force and Wings. He was actually born in Jersey. He's another one who changed his name because he started out, his mother used to call him Brian Hines. But the Moody Blues themselves had their first gig. They're a Birmingham group, that's in the Midlands in the UK. And 64, May the 2nd actually, was their first gig. Now, their name's interesting, because Mitchell and Butler's still is basically a big brewery. Bass, for any beer drinkers, is one of their very famous brands. And they were originally planning to call themselves the M&B 5, because the brewery's known as M&B. And they approached Mitchell and Butler to get sponsorship. And they say, "Oh, look, lads, we're calling ourselves the M&B 5. Will you sponsor us?" So, and the brewery said no.
We want nothing to do with rock and roll, because in '64 it was probably not as popular, and probably it felt to the brewery that that genre was a little rebellious.
Absolutely, but I mean they liked the M&B, so they came up with the name Moody Blues, which is quite a cool name. But the first lineup, I mean, they were essentially a supergroup. Because they came from four different Birmingham groups that were very, very popular at the time. Denny Lane came from his own group, Denny Lane and the Diplomats. Clint Warwick came from Danny King and the Dukes. Mike Pinder and Ray Thomas, long-time Moody Blues people, they came from two bands, the great name, El Riot and the Rebels, who became the Crew Cats. And Graham Edge came from Jerry Levine and the Avengers, all very successful local bands in Birmingham at the time. And that's the lineup that recorded the first album, Magnificent Moodies, in the middle of '65, and also their first single, Go Now, which was a Bessie Banks cover. And Denny Laine was the lead on Go Now. And that's still my favourite Moody Blues song, I think.
No, I'm a Knights in White Satin fan, but what can I say?
Oh, I mean, they've got a heck of a catalogue. What happened was, in '66, Denny Laine decided it was time to move on, and he set up his own band, Denny Laine's Electric String Band. And as I say before, he went on to Ginger Baker's Air Force and Wings. And the other original member, the bass player, Clint Warwick, he left around the same sort of time because he wanted a family life. He's one of these guys that wasn't really into the world of rock and roll. So he called it a day. Now, whether he still thinks that was a good idea, I don't know.
You know, it's interesting, on a side note, how the groups were naming themselves back there in '64 and '65. It was a guy and then the band, a guy and then the band.
Yeah.
Is there a history behind that? Do you know why that was a thing?
I don't know really. If you think about the '50s, well, mostly the '50s were rock and roll artists who had backing bands, but the doo-wop sort of R&B people, they tended to be groups, but they tended to just have single names. I mean, the names of birds were very popular in the '50s. You had the Ravens, the Orioles, and those '50s bands tended to just be that. And I think what happened was, as sort of rock and roll started to morph into beat music and to develop, as it were, you had the new lineup of lead singer, 2 guitarists, bass player, and drummer. And very often then it would lend itself to, because very often those days the lead singer didn't play an instrument very often. So it would make sense to have it as a name and then a band.
Interesting.
I think it's an evolutionary thing, really.
Now, when Denny Laine created the Denny Laine's Electric String Band, was he influenced by the Beatles? Because that really sounds like something the Beatles would write as a song title or an album.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, everybody was... Well, it's not true, actually. Everybody wasn't being influenced by the Beatles then. But, I mean, Denny Laine, I mean, he went on to play with McCartney in Wings, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he was very much looking to... I mean, you've got albums like Revolver and Rubber Soul, 65, 66. It's a bit before Pepper, 67. But yeah, he was probably going down the same sort of route as the Beatles were then, in terms of wanting to extend out of what was becoming sort of beat music. This is very early days for rock music. It's around 65, late 65, 66 really, that rock music started. So I think he saw himself, and that's really the direction the Moody Blues were going in. I mean, Go Now is a classic piece of blues, really, from Bessie Banks. And they were in the process of developing. So I think he just decided he wanted to go off into a slightly different route.
Okay. Just figured I'd ask that question because a few people might have caught that connection with the band name.
Yeah, absolutely.
So continue, Derek, now that I interrupted you.
It's a great time for Moody Blues fans for tours. I mean, the Moody Blues, they're doing a 50th anniversary tour they're calling Days of Future Past. And it includes John Haywood, John Lodge, and Graham Edge. Now, Graham Edge was one of those original lineup guys. And the Moody Blues themselves, now they're in Las Vegas. They've been there for a while. And the last 3 days, you can just about catch them. If you happen to be in Vegas on the 3rd to the 6th of October, you can see the Moody Blues with their 50th anniversary. And Justin Hayward's on tour as well. He's in the Bahamas on the 10th of February, and then across America, 18th of February to the 2nd of March. And John Lodge is actually on tour. He's on tour from the 12th to the 26th of October. And the reason I mention John Lodge is when Denny Laine and Clint Warwick left, it was 1966. That was when Justin Hayward and John Lodge both joined. And John Lodge had known Mike Pinder and Ray Thomas back in the days of El Riot and the Rebels. So it's easy. It's interesting to see how sort of what goes around comes around.
Yeah, and the Moody Blues, you said they're playing in Vegas, so all of our listeners on Radio Vegas Rocks have a chance to see him or them the 3rd through the 6th. I mean, that's coming up. That's just a few days away.
Absolutely. I mean, they're for the that particular residency starts in mid-late September. So, you know, at the first glance of the first person who hears the show, they're there. I mean, they'd be a great band to see.
Now, as we continue with birthdays, October 16th has a really good birthday.
Oh, absolutely. Happy birthday, Bob Weir, born in 1947. As you say, on the 16th, he was born in San Francisco, one of the founding members of the Grateful Dead. They were still called the they were called the Warlocks when they started. But they had their first recording session on the 3rd of November 65. They would call themselves the Emergency Crew, and they recorded half a dozen songs.
And the Grateful Dead was one of the great just jam bands.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they're famously, I mean, they have stuff that goes on for 20, 25, 45 minutes. Absolutely unbelievable to see live. And they're one of the few bands that encourage bootlegging. I can remember reading that in some of their gigs, they had a little enclosure near the stage where people who brought their own home tape recording gear could actually get close to the speakers to get a better response. They must be probably the most bootleg band on the face of the earth, I should think.
I would imagine. They're known more for their touring than they are for any of their studio stuff as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't say they haven't been successful as a studio band, but you're absolutely right. I mean, an awful lot of their albums are live albums as well. And they were also there right at the beginning of the psychedelic era. I mean, when Ken Casey started doing his acid test, he did the first one in, November the 27th, 65, when acid was still legal across America. Which is a strange thing to think about now.
Do some LSD, man. It's free. It's government approved, man.
Exactly. Well, the CIA invented it. It's got to be.
I'm glad you said that, Derek.
Allegedly.
Mm-hmm. We've covered that.
Ken Casey was very much a part of that. And he's the guy that wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of the best films I've ever seen.
Definitely.
And he's the one who had a bus tour across America in the mid-60s in a bus called Further that inspired Paul McCartney's Magical Mystery and the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour.
That's interesting right there.
Yeah. And they debuted as the Grateful Dead on the 10th of December 1965 at the Fillmore West. And Bob Weir's on tour.
That's because the Grateful Dead can't be on tour anymore.
Well, no, I think, I mean, without Jerry Garcia, I find it unlikely they ever call themselves Grateful Dead. But, I mean, Bob Weir, they carried on. I mean, various members of the Grateful Dead are pretty much continuously on tour in various combinations and under various names. But Bob Weir's around 16th of October to the 20th of January, so plenty of chance to see Bob Weir in America and Mexico. He pops over the border there at one point.
Yeah, we don't talk about Mexico very often when we're talking about these tours, so that's an interesting add to the tour.
That's right. Not many bands seem to get to Mexico. Quite a lot seem to get to Russia and Eastern Europe at the moment, I noticed.
Well, since the wall came down, and AC/DC was one of the first bands to actually play in Russia after that happened, I think they've westernized themselves enough to where music and rock music in general has grown pretty big over there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they were, even under the communist days, in Russia, there was a big black market for Beatles LPs and other Western sort of rock and roll stuff. So I think the market's always been there.
Yeah, a lot of people don't fathom that, but at a time in Russia, you couldn't just turn on the radio to hear all these great bands we're talking about, and to get records from them was even harder.
Absolutely. It wasn't much better actually in the UK up until 1967. The BBC had the official monopoly on music, and they had 3 or 4 different channels, and they had something called the Light Service, and that only played a smattering of sort of pop music and rock music. But about 1963, we had pirate radio, and this was where radio ships would anchor just inside international waters and transmit non-stop 24-hour, pop music and rock and roll across Britain. I mean, Radio Caroline was the first. I forget the year, but it was about 64, I think. Probably about 64. So it took the British government 3.5 years to recognise there was a demand for pop music, rock and roll music. And that was when Radio 1 started in, I think, about the August 1967. Absolutely incredible. I mean, unlike America, where you have lots of rock channels and country stations and country stations and all kinds of stations, and did do it back in the 50s and 60s. Very different scene.
Yeah, because you gave me that knowledge of the pirate radio boats. I actually just discussed that with a friend of mine not less than a week ago, and I told him what you told me, the story of that, and I'm always diverting the show, and I'm sorry.
No, diversions are always good things. But we do have another birthday on the 23rd of October, 1940. Manfred Mann. He was born Manfred Lubowitz in Johannesburg in South Africa. And he went on to be really quite an important part of the 60s and 70s British scene.
Probably one of the biggest names ever to come out of South Africa in the music scene.
Oh, absolutely. Now, what's interesting, he met a sort of long-time associate, Mike Hugg, in 1962 at Butlins holiday camp in Clacton. I think Mike Hugg was working there. And we probably... In the UK, in the 50s particularly, in the early mid-60s, holiday camps were very popular. If you mention a prison camp, like a big camp with mitten huts and chalets for the sleeping in, and big mass catering halls, and a barbed wire fence around it to keep people out.
The riffraff, keep that riffraff out.
And then you'd have swimming pools. On the upside, you'd have swimming pools and bars and a fairground, and everything was absolutely free. So it was an all-inclusive holiday. And in those days, in the 50s and early 60s, British people very, very rarely went abroad. Well, unless you had a lot of money, but the vast majority of British people holidayed in the UK, in the seaside holiday resorts of the various coastlines of the UK. And it wasn't until the cheap package tours to Spain arrived in the sort of mid-60s, the Brits used to go abroad. So these holiday camps were very, very popular at the time. And Butlins was probably the most famous of them all. But he then formed the Mike Hugg Blues Band, or they did, and they played modern jazz, which is interesting. It gives you a flavour for, particularly when he got into Chapter 3 at the end of the 60s, where he was coming from. Paul Jones, the lead singer, came on board in 63, and that's when they essentially became Manfred Mann. String of hits through from 64 to the end of the decade on both sides of the Atlantic. Then Mike Darbo replaced Paul Jones in 66. So they had a couple of different singers, and the Manfred Mann pop group essentially finished around 69, and Chapter 3 was formed, and Mike Hugg was the drummer with Manfred Mann, but when he formed Chapter 3, he moved over to keyboards, which is quite a rare thing.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Because the John LeBang Show will be right back.
After this. That's guaranteed. Yes! Pane in the Glass, commercial and residential window cleaning for a beautiful sparkling shine that's crystal clear. Call Pane in the Glass Window Cleaning. You can find them on Facebook at Pane in the Glass. Hey, man, you're listening to the John LeBang Show, man.
That's good, because that means you ain't stupid.
Chris Slade.
Of
course.
AC/DC fame and The Firm.
Well, exactly. I mean, happy birthday, Chris Slade. He was born on the 30th of October, 1946. But sort of just before moving on to him, the Manfreds are on tour at the moment across the UK, 17th of October to the 30th of November. They're pretty much on tour all of the time. But I mean, Chris Slade, what a pedigree, what a guy. Born in Pontypridd, South Wales, which I think is the part of the world that Tom Jones comes from, which is why he was with the Tom Jones Band from 1963 to 69.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. I love that tune.
I didn't realize
Tom Jones is a big favorite of mine. Now everybody knows. I kept that secret because it was a secret thing, but now the whole world knows.
The secret's out. Tom Jones is in the house.
Actually, my favorite tune by Tom Jones is "She's a Lady." What a jam!
He's got a, again. He's one of those guys that it's never really been that cool to be into, but he's always been on the sort of fringes of rock and roll. He's got an unbelievable voice.
Definitely, but we're talking about Chris Slade, not Tom Jones.
And then he was in the Earth Band across the 70s, 71 to 78. Then he was with Uriah Heep for a couple of years, the beginning of the 80s, before he joined the Firm in 84 with Paul Rodgers and Jimmy Page. I mean, what a lineup that would be.
Yeah, that was as all-star of a lineup as you could have ever had. The Firm was just fabulous. I think they did only 1 or 2 albums, maybe?
2, I think.
Yep.
I think it's 2. But absolutely. And again, if you said, oh, do you like the Firm? Very few people probably have ever heard of the Firm. And then, of course, he was with one of your all-time favourite bands, AC/DC, joined them in time for Razor's Edge in 1990.
Right. He's the drummer on Thunderstruck, which arguably is their most popular song after You Shook Me All Night Long.
Yeah. Oh, he was a good part of that band. And he was on the world tour as well. They did a tour in 1991. And as it says on the album, 21 countries. So that's a serious old world tour.
Oh, definitely.
Just called Live. So some great examples for Chris Slade.
But he wasn't finished with AC/DC because you're going to tell us about the next group he was in.
Well, Asia. Yeah, he went on from AC/DC to Asia for 5 years at the beginning of 2000, and. I mean, he's sort of on tour now. It's not really tour as such. He does this sort of retrospective, and there's one date I can find in the diary when he's in Belfast on the 9th of November.
He did tour as well with AC/DC just a few years back when Phil Rudd had his little run-in with the law in, New Zealand. So he played on the tour. If you don't mind, I'm going to diverge into AC/DC just for a moment. Because I don't know if you've heard this, Derek, but we reported it this past weekend. Angus was sighted at a recording studio with his nephew Stevie. A week later, there were pictures of Brian Johnson and Phil Rudd at that same studio. But the big news that I reported this weekend is that they're going to be doing an album, and they've got a bunch of pre-recorded stuff that Malcolm had sent Angus throughout the years that they're going to use on the album, in the upcoming album. So we're actually going to have the deceased Malcolm Young on brand new AC/DC stuff, and it looks like it's going to be the primary band playing on that album.
Oh, it'd be brilliant.
Now that I've diverged us, you can continue.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, the Beatles did the same thing, didn't they, for their anthology? They got some stuff that John Lennon had recorded.
Right, that was Free as a Bird, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Free as a... That was a great little tune.
It was, yeah. Oh, it's great, I think, when you get this stuff coming back from the grave, as it were. It really is good.
Yeah, it gave me, I have to admit, I got goosebumps when I was reading that, and I was like, I can't believe it, because... we had Axl Rose. We had a whole mishmash of musicians carrying that last tour because of all the random things that happened to the band. That rocker bus tour, man, they kind of busted a little bit there. But it looks like they're coming back. And, man, I you know me, I'm giddy as a schoolboy right there. I was going to say a schoolgirl, but, we don't wear dresses over here.
Right. Oh, it's getting very popular over here.
What is that?
Okay, we're up to birthdays on October 23rd.
Oh, this is an interesting one. This is Happy Birthday, Steve Cropper, Booker T and the MGs. 23rd of October 1941, born in Willow Springs, Missouri. And Steve Cropper pops up in the story, but I thought, what a wonderful time to look at the cautionary tale of Stax Records, and a pause for thought for anybody who owns a small record label and thinks they've got a great break coming when they do a distribution deal with a big record label. And it all started back in 1959 when a guy called Jim Stewart formed Satellite Records, originally a sort of country label. And in August of 1960, Carla Thomas and Rufus Thomas released a song called 'Cause I Love You on Satellite. And a guy called Buster Williams was a pressing plant operator, and he contacted Jerry Wexler, who was one of the real movers and shakers at Atlantic, and told Jerry Wexler that he got this particular record they were pressing large numbers of and going out on a tiny little label. So Jerry Wexler got in touch with Jim Stewart, and he agreed to lease that particular record just on a handshake. And he then released it on ATCO, which is one of the Atlantic Records labels, and he struck a deal for $5,000 and an option on future Satellite product. And I mean, Jerry Wexler was very impressed with the sort of vibe at Stax Studios, and he actually got lots of his Atlantic artists went to record there. And some of the Atlantic artists, people who actually signed to Atlantic, actually released the material on the Stax label. And Booker T and the MGs became the house band, one of the best house bands of all time. Booker T went on following summer to release Green Onions on Vault, and that found its way onto Stax. But now the story starts to get really interesting. In 1965, Jerry Wexler thought that there was quite a possibility, because Atlantic were a very, very successful label, and he thought that there might be a situation arising where they would be sold, and there was no actual contract with Jim Stewart at Stax. So he advised Jim Stewart to sign up to a proper written contract, which he did.
Without reading, right?
He never read it. That's right. Or he certainly didn't read it thoroughly enough, because he trusted Jerry Wexler implicitly. His word's his bond, as it were. But in '67, Warner's actually took over Atlantic, and the owners, brothers Armet and Neshui Ertegun, and Jerry Wexler, the third owner, they have reputedly got 17 million in Warner stocks and very nice jobs out of it. Thank you very much. And Atlantic became part of Warner 7 Arts. But this is where the rub came. When Jim Stewart came to renegotiate his deal with the Atlantic lawyers, he discovered in that 1965 contract, the Atlantic lawyers had put a clause in that said that Stax material released while the distribution deal was on with Atlantic was actually owned by Atlantic. So overnight he discovered he'd got no back catalogue.
So he got no royalties for any of that.
Absolutely. A bit like the Rolling Stones lost all the royalties to their 60s stuff to Alan Klein.
Steve Cropper's on tour, right?
Oh, that's right. If you're in America, 3rd of October to the 2nd of March, he's all over the place. So, I mean, again, he'd be a great person to see. And I think Booker T's on tour. He might have finished his current one, but he's very active as well, out and about.
And everybody can find this stuff on your website.
www.rockandrollunraveled.com.
And you've got a plethora of other social media that you're very active on, including Twitter and Facebook, correct?
Absolutely. Twitter at RNR Unravelled and Facebook at Rock and Roll Unravelled. I think there's a theme developing here, John.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Unravel. That's what's unraveling here.
Exactly.
So Derek, I thank you again for joining me. Next month, we have a special broadcast coming with you and I, and that'll be the best frontmen of all time. Holy
Absolutely.
cow. That should be every bit as great as our top 100 albums we did just a few months back. If you didn't hear that, ladies and gentlemen, you can go to either Derek's website or my website and get the archives of that show, because that was 2 hours of incredible rock and roll talk. So until next month, Derek, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you then.
My pleasure, John. Cheers, mate.
10, bye-bye.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.